So what does physical defense do anyways? In this video, we're going to analyze what physical defense actually does in triangle strategy. This isn't like speculation. I have numbers from actual tests. So what I did is there are 3 enemies on this map with different defense values. We have this guy is 52 physical defense. Then we have these shield boys. They have 74. And then I also tested a few hits on this dude with 28 physical defense. So we have 3 points of data for damage values. This is in hard mode. Okay. So what is the deal with physical defense? What does it do? So in this game, you have strength, which increases damage. So like your listed strength will multiply by some value depending on if you are Roland and Maxwell or Anna or another unit that isn't affected by like external circumstances. Like Maxwell and Roland deal like 0.75 damage. Like that, they have a multiplier. Anna has a 0.5 multiplier. So other units, their strength is like 4. Like their damage is like 4 times the number. The strength value, and then it's reduced by physical defense. So strength and physical defense interact with each other. So that's like the key takeaway. So how does it actually work? So the higher your physical defense, the less damage you take, which is something you would expect. However, the way that damage reduction works is not like magnitude based insofar as if I hit you for 100 and you have 50 defense, it just shaves off 50. Like it's not like it uses subtraction. From what I can tell, each point of physical defense is roughly 1% damage reduction. So 25 physical defense is roughly equivalent to a 25% reduction in physical damage. So here are the values that I tested. I'm going to go over the math behind this to just kind of like show it. And if I can get a few attacks in, like let's see if Roland can attack these. Okay, he can't yet. So we'll pass some turns really quick. Alright, so okay, here's a perfect example. Alright, Sarah Noah. So I can actually calculate this for you before I even hit him to let you know what the damage will be. Okay, so I have 58 strength, great. My listed power is 237. So if I were to hit an enemy with 0 defense, they would take 237 damage. However, if I hit an enemy with 50 defense, they'll take roughly half of that. So this guy has 52 defense. Let's go over and whack him and see what happens. 114 damage. In other words, 50%. So let's actually look at the listed value. So 114, let's just remember that number. 114 damage, listed value of 237. So that's half of the damage. Okay, so the tests I've done are like legit. Like I'm going to go through them in a second, but I just wanted to show you 50 defense is roughly half damage. So that's good to know. And it also affects you too. So if you have Sarah Noah who has 50 physical defense, you're looking at taking half damage. Now when you're playing the game, you won't notice this because you'll just be used to like damage values. So like if we look at this spear enemy, his basic attack hits for 159. His strength is low, but even enemy spear users have their like max hits reduced to account for being able to hit multiple targets. So that's something to keep in mind. But you can see here that like the calculation works similarly. Like his damage is like similar to Roland's, right? Like 159 at 57 strength. And then if we look at Roland, 161 power at 56 strength. So spears, the spear modifier also works on enemies. Damage for single target units that just smack one thing with their basic attack, their modifier is unchanged. Okay, so for defense, here are the numbers that I have run. So this was me testing on this map, level 50. I do not believe level affects damage taken at all. So, okay, here are the tests for Roland. We hit 28 armor, 28 physical defense. The final damage was 102. This was from the front. And the listed damage was 161. So if we divide 102 by 161, we end up with 0.63 And then if we multiply that by 100, it gives us the percentage of the damage actually taken. So of the listed damage versus 28 armor, Roland did 63% of his total damage with an attack. So the damage was reduced by 37%. So one thing I've noticed is that it seems that, based on these limited tests at least, when you have like 25 armor, your reduction is around like 30%. And then like, you know, in 28 in this case, it's around like 35, 37. And then as you approach like 50, it just becomes like 50%. And then as you go over that, it still increases it, but it doesn't, it like the percentage of damage reduced seems to not be as effective. So like for your first like 20 to 30 defense in something, it seems to drastically reduce the damage the most. And then it starts to cap out at like 50, and then it starts to still increase it, but then not as much as you go over 50. So, okay, so 37% damage reduction, 28 armor. This was a test where I had Roland attack, 161 listed damage, hit for 102. All right, next we have versus 52 armor. So that would be these spear dudes. We had Roland attack them from the front. He hit 80. This is versus 52 physical defense. So 80 out of 161. It was like 0.495, so I just rounded it up to 0.5, so roughly 50% damage reduced. And then versus 74 armor, these shield guys. You see over here. Roland hit a 58 from the front out of a 161 of listed damage. And then that gave us 0.36 times 100. That's 36% damage taken. Damage reduced by 64%. So here's like the quick breakdown. 28 armor had a 37% damage reduction. 52 armor had a 50% damage reduction. And 74 armor had a 64% damage reduction. So even though 74 is well over twice as high as 28, it did not have twice as much damage reduction. So after you hit 50 for armor, you still get an increased damage reduction, but it starts to cap off. The reason why they probably did this is so that once things hit absurd levels of armor, they just don't take 0 damage, or they like still take some damage. Because otherwise, if you would stack your passive armor with, you know, some damage reduction, you'd be virtually invincible because the damage reduction would be so absurd. But for the calculations of the percentage, like armor, like how much armor gives you, like what does one armor give you? So at 28 armor, each point of armor, physical armor, is 1.3% damage reduction at 28. At 52, each point of damage, or each point of armor, is roughly 1% damage reduction. And then at 74 armor, each point of armor was equivalent to 0.86% damage reduction per point. So you can kind of see, and this is incomplete data, but this is across a few units too. Like I tested Anna's attacks, I tested some Serenoa attacks, and you even saw here, right here, like 52 armor just halved the damage. So, and we can actually show it again too. So Gila, so we can calculate this out pretty easily. 133, so it should be half of 133, which is like what? I don't know, like 60 something, 65 maybe. All right, so we'll just whack this. Or I'm sorry, wait, 29. Hold on, let me see something. Why did that hit at 29? That's weird. Hold up. That's a, hold on. Let me make sure I did that right. I don't understand why that hit so low. That should not have hit a 29. Half damage of 133 is like 60 something. Let's see. Strength of 32. There might be more interaction here than I realize. There might be more to this than just, because like just based on the numbers, like if this is the damage she's supposed to deal. Let me make sure there's nothing weird going on with this. No, there's, you know, still just 52 physical defense. Let me make sure there's nothing weird about these. Nope. Okay, so he just has increased strength. So she actually smacked him. So she has 32 strength, and he has 52 defense, and she did like quarter damage. So that's interesting. So that actually, okay, so maybe we need to test with some of these low damage units some more, but all right, so like for example, for, what's his face, Maxwell. 59 strength, listed damage of 170. Stab him, 86, or 88. So that's like half of 170. So, alright, and then for Anna, 54 strength, listed damage of 113. She should hit like 50 something. She hit 60, yeah, so that's like half, right? So it seems, okay, so it might be possible that the lower your strength, the less of an effect it has. So if you're like below 50 strength and you're hitting an enemy with like 50 defense, if you're like 30 strength, your damage like might get quartered. This needs tested, but it seems like most damage units, this like formula is like correct, where it's like roughly, you know, basically each point is like 1% damage reduction. And there might be like some threshold where your damage becomes quartered. All right, so let's check Benedict. All right, 43 strength, listed damage of 177. So 43 strength. So he should deal 177, so half of 177. So let's see what he hits. 62. Okay, so he had, okay. I think there's another thing going on here. There's like a secondary influence. I think the magnitude of strength actually, like it's not enough just to look at the raw damage value. The actual magnitude of the strength seems to scale damage. So he hit like what, a 62 or something? So if I pull up my calculator, and then if I go to, all right, so he had 177 divided by 2, that's 88. And he hit like a 60 something. So it seems to be the case that if you have, like in his case, he's like 10 levels below their defense, it seems to reduce the damage even more, like the difference. So like, even though the listed damage is relatively high, it's being further decreased by his actual strength value. And we've basically just observed that here. So like, for example, Gila, her strength of 32 caused her damage to be quartered. And then Benedict's damage was reduced by around like roughly 30% or 25% even further because his strength was lower. So we can essentially conclude that if your strength is much lower than an enemy unit's physical defense by like 10 levels or more, it can get like halved or quartered even further. So there seems to be another modifier. And the reason this didn't come up in testing is because all the units I tested were 50 strength. But now that we know that's a thing, it's interesting. Most units that are going to be smacking things for physical damage have at least 50 strength, so these calculations are fine. But for these other units, it seems that they get their damage further reduced, which would explain why sometimes like Gila or like Frederica whacking a thing with a book deals like 2 damage, because it looks at her strength, which is probably like 20, and then it might be like reducing that by 65% and then reducing it again by the defense value. So that seems to be what happens, and what that actually makes sense, because I have witnessed like enemy mages whacking with like 10 strength, and like their book damage, it says it's like 100, but it deals like 3 instead of like what you'd expect, which would be like, I don't know, 40, 50, something along those lines. But we can safely conclude that each point of physical defense is roughly 1% damage reduction. And then until you hit 50. And then once you hit 50, it's 0.8. So Benedict has a 50% physical damage reduction of listed damage, which isn't something you interact with much. It's the value here. You can see here, power. And then it gets reduced by 0.8% per point above 50. So he has 28 points times 0.8. So if we calculate his damage reduction, it would be roughly this. It would be 28 times 0.8 plus 50. So, well, actually, no, that's not true. I think it would just be the value times 0.8. So it would just be 68 times 0.8. So it would be roughly 54%. Because the 74 physical defense enemy had an effective damage reduction of, what was it, like 64%. So it seems like once you hit once you hit certain thresholds, you have different mitigation values. So this one's definitely more complicated than the strength one. especially because we made like a discovery midway through, and that discovery being that if your strength is not close to the defense of the thing you're hitting, your damage gets further mitigated. But then also, strangely, if a unit's defense gets so high, like drastically above, like for example, like 50 strength versus 74 defense, physical defense, you don't see like a huge damage reduction. You see like almost like a linear damage reduction. Whereas if you hit like 30 strength against 50 defense, you see an additional damage reduction on top of the basic, like the base, like physical defense reducing damage. And this is reproducible across different units with 50 strength, where hitting enemies with 50 and 70 defense produces similar results, where each point of physical defense increases damage reduction by roughly 0.8% damage reduction per point of physical defense. So yeah, very strange system. It kind of makes sense though, because essentially what they can do is they can balance like Benedict and like healers like Gila and like people and like use like mages with their books, so they can't just walk up to an enemy and whack them for big damage. So essentially there's like strength thresholds where like once you hit like 40 to like 60 strength, you start to deal like base damage, and then it's affected by armor in like a linear way. But before then it gets reduced even further. So like enemy mages whacking you and enemy healers whacking you with a physical attack with their actual weapon is like very ineffective, and you whacking enemies in a similar way is similarly ineffective. So I think that's all we can learn from now. I have some notes, but like damage variation. There is some damage variation. It could cause, it's like plus or minus 1 point. It's caused by rounding. This is all right. Physical defense directly mitigates a percentage of damage, regardless of source, assuming that it is like armor respecting, and it's like of the same type. So, for example, physical defense will only reduce physical damage sources. It won't reduce magic damage. Roland and Maxwell have a 25 to 30% damage reduction. This is calculated on strength though, so the actual value listed. So if I go look at Roland or Maxwell, the actual value listed is already calculated out. So his power of 161 is correct, and this is what's used. Same thing with Maxwell. And then Anna has half damage, as I covered in the other video, for like her strength modifier. So it's like strength times 2 gives you her base damage instead of strength times 4 for other units. And then for Roland and Maxwell, it's like roughly strength times like 2.9 or 3. Most units have a strong single target attack that deals good damage. Units like Roland and Maxwell have abilities that have higher damage magnitude, therefore competitive damage. Oh yeah, that's another point too. That's more of the damage video, but yeah, this damage mitigation thing. All right, so check this out too, right? We got, all right, 213. Crits deal roughly 50 to 30% more damage, so 213, he should hit like 140. Okay, like 130 in this case. So that was decent. Because I guess his base hit would be like 80 in that case. Yeah, so my math was just bad. Yeah, because it'd be maybe closer to 100. Maybe, yeah. All right, let's have Roland attack these just to kind of show the damage. So we have 161. So these should take roughly 60% less damage. Okay, so 161 to 58. That's basically 60. Yeah, that's basically 60% less. So yeah, it holds up. So yeah, that's basically how physical defense works. Definitely more complicated than the strength video, which is just about dealing damage, because it interacts with physical defense, and physical defense is the thing that like triggers the most modifiers and has more to it, whereas strength is just like basically damage. But yeah, that's it for this one. Definitely like the video and subscribe if you enjoy this type of content. I'm going to be covering all the stats in as much detail as I can find. If I miss anything, or if someone else discovers something that I missed, I'll pin it. So yeah, thanks for checking this out, and I will see you in the next video.